Hi, everybody, and welcome to Conversations at Out on Film. My name is Craig Hardesty, and today's conversation we have writer Stanley Kalu and director Ali LeRoi of The Obituary of Tunde Johnson, which is opening in theaters this week. Stanley and Ali, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Out on Film.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
So, Stanley, I want to start with you. You wrote this as a student when you came to the U.S. What was the spark that made you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard to start writing this story?
I think it was really, I grew up as a majority my entire life. So stepping into America and interacting with systemic racism for the first time was very jarring to me. The news cycle at the time and forever really kept highlighting, young Black men, people that look like me, die every day, and I found that inherently traumatic. And I was just really confused about why violence against others, whether that's like any underrepresented minority group, anyone that's outside of the social norm, why their bodies were subject to violence. Um, so yeah, when I was 19, I kind of wrote a movie to try and parse through that experience and just try to understand America. Um, and yeah, that was really it.
And then, Ali, you are an accomplished Emmy award-winning writer, director, and producer, which I'm only assuming comes with some sense of being able to pick and choose some projects. What was it about Stanley's story that made you want to both champion it and take it on to bring it to life on screen?
Well, every now and again somebody will go, "I never read something like this before," and that was precisely it. I'd never seen a story that tackled, big social issues, but not in this didactic way where it really is just about, the speechifying and the
Mhm.
stance taking, but it was really a backdrop for a human experience.
Mm.
And that's the way we live, right? Sometimes films kind of traffic in the space of artistic rhetoric, as it were.
Mhm.
It knows what it wants you to believe when the film starts, and that really wasn't the case here. I mean, we certainly might have opinions and objectives in terms of what we want to express, but in the space of what people are supposed to take away from it, there's a lot of flexibility because there's so many entry points to the experience.
Mhm.
So it's
Mm.
not there was nothing dogmatic about it, and I just really appreciated that.
I think too. So Stanley, one of the things that struck me when I was watching this was, and kind of reading. I was curious to read some of the reactions. You employ a couple of conventions,
Mhm.
in kind of narrative filmmaking. One is the time loop, and the other is incorporating a love story.
Yeah.
It is a teenage coming of age story. What what made you choose to make your main character and and his boyfriend make them queer?
Um, I think it's just that. It's that it wasn't really, it just felt correct. In terms of like the time loop, that was a reaction against cyclical violence, and so that just felt true. When it came to the love story, I've always been really interested in my generation's take on identity and queerness. Um, I think it's really remarkable and a credit to where America is, um, to where the world is, that a relationship can occur that's simply a love story. That's not about the trauma of queerness. That's not about the difficulties of it. Rather, that it can just be a love story. So I think it was really a study on that, because where I'm from, it's not it's not like here. Where I'm from, queer folk are under extreme duress, extreme violence, jailed, stoned on the streets, that kind of thing. So I was always just really struck by queer culture and how accepting it was, and how beautiful it was to see, such a stark difference from experiences that occurred back home. Um, so I think all in all, I just found it like really inspirational, more so than anything. I was just really inspired by the love is love nature of all of this, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And you also turn a couple kind of like family cliches
Right,
on its head.
right, right,
Talking about, it's, I'd have to say, as a gay man watching this and watching parents react positively, it's kind of, that in and of itself is kind of jarring. You have
right,
like, wait a second, did I miss that?
right,
It's just like, um, that experience of having a positive reaction
right,
without the trauma. You still don't expect that even now.
right. And I think, and I said this at TIFF, is that for me it was an aspirational image, particularly within the African slash immigrant context. Is sometimes I have this inherent belief that if one can see it, and it's like the beauty of like representation and like diversity on screen, is that if one can see it, you can know it's possible. So I wanted to take the emphasis off of difficulty and showcase that there is another option, there is another way, um, where if someone is to come out, um, you know, parents can embrace them and love them and make that true. Um, so I'm like really happy that it was jarring for you, but it wasn't jarring in a way of to hurt. It was jarring in a
Right.
way like I did not know that was possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that makes me really happy. So your reaction has really brought me a lot of joy.
Eh, There is a line in that scene that struck me in particular, is when Tunde's father says, with unconditional love comes unconditional fear.
Hmm.
And meaning that in the context of being a gay man in the city, a young Black gay man in the city, I think that it was just something that was really striking and that really kind of resonated. And it was, and Ali, it was almost as an aside as you're filming it. It's like if you weren't really in the moment, you might have missed it.
Well, I mean, but that's a lot of the texture of this film kind of exists in that way, and there's a certain stillness that I wanted to bring to um, imagining and rendering it so that, some of those, subtle little details that could easily get lost in big, bombastic, emotional
Mhm.
conversations were things that could resonate because the silence and the reactions are almost as informative as the words.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's like, so it requires it to slow down and give the viewer an opportunity to really kind of take it all in. So a lot of the frames that I was composing were things that could sit relatively still and allow the movement and the emotions to be the action that
Right.
you're dealing with, as opposed to it's choppy, it's cutty, it's got some cool angles. I wasn't against those things,
Right.
but this is a much more sort of sublime approach to something that could be, like I said again, really big and emotional and bombastic, and that, and honestly, I have had personally, uh, I will say more than a few experiences with uh, friends and some relatives coming out to me personally,
Right.
and the sensitivity that's required there. And what was interesting to me, again, on the personal front, is that this was not because of any sort of inquiry that, you know, that I was posing. It's just at some point, you know, people would say to me, hey, you know, I want to tell you something. And then, you know, we sat and we had the conversation. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, you know, if you want it to be a secret, your secret's safe with me. And, you
Right.
know, and if, you know, and literally one friend, I literally had to say, you know, because they didn't come out directly to me, but it seemed obvious that they were in a relationship with someone. And so I went to them, I said, look, I don't know what's happening. I said, but I can tell you what people are saying. And if in fact, you know, this is a relationship that you're in, as your friend, I don't want you to feel like you have to hide that from me. I mean, do whatever you
Right.
want to do wherever else you go and feel the way that you need to feel. But I'm looking at this. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Okay, fine. But if I'm right,
Right.
and it just really does open a path. And, you know, that particular person wouldn't come out publicly for another, you know, significant number of years.
Right. Yeah.
But best I know, I was the first person that ever had that conversation with him. So, you know, just a lot of sensitivity comes to the subject matter. And that's on the love story part of it. You know, there's a whole, you know, violence against Black bodies thing, something else.
Right. So when there are points that you're watching the movie, like you said, there are multiple entry points, um, and I found kind of watching this, thinking this is a really nice coming of age story, but also knowing that there is violence coming. Having been through, you know, when you get through the first two, and you have that same, you're building a tension
Mhm.
that you're, I mean, I as a viewer started to really feel, knowing that this is a really nice love story, but I know this is coming, that
Yeah.
there is violence coming, that Tunde is going to die soon again. As a director, how do you start approaching and building that tension for us?
Well, so this was, you know, atypical. Uh, it was an atypical approach to the time loop device because, you know, typically in films that use it, there tends to be a set goal
Hmm.
and a recurring set of obstacles that the protagonist has to recognize and then determine what adjustments they need to make, and that gets them closer and closer
Right.
to that goal. But we had two problems in this film. A, Tunde is not wholly aware that it's like, am I in a time loop? Is this the drugs? Am I asleep?
Right.
Like, so first he has to have some sort of recognition around the fact that this is a thing that's occurring. But then he doesn't know why. So he
Right.
can't go into the day going, okay, I turned left at that corner yesterday, so today I'm going to turn right. It wasn't that at all. However, when he wakes up and he does a thing that's different than he did the day before, in the domino theory of things, that changes the trajectory of the entire day. But the futility of it is that it still doesn't save him. And what
Right.
he ultimately needs to recognize is that his salvation is something that is internal and not external, right? As Black
Hmm.
people can't save ourselves from external forces that would seek to harm us. However, we can develop a sense of who we are and who we need to be and how we relate to others so that we don't intentionally put ourselves in circumstances that would damage us. And that's the love relationship.
Right. I think, Stanley, along those lines, with the time loop convention, as Ali was just saying, like part of that is, you know, typically the protagonist goes along, and like you said, you have a series of goals and a series of obstacles, a series of wrongs that you have to make right. Um, in Tunde, there's nothing for him to make right. He has done nothing wrong, and the outcome is always going to be what the outcome is at the end of each of one of these loops, and it's kind of turning that convention on itself by saying it isn't, there is nothing for Tunde to correct,
Right.
because there's nothing that these
Right,
aren't
not to
choices for
correct
him.
per se. It's not an
Right.
active, uh, you know, material correction.
Right.
It's an understanding of who he is and the space that he inhabits that he needs to perceive in a different way
Right.
Hmm.
that will give him some avenue of relief, not total relief, just
Right.
some.
Hmm. Yeah.
there was one of the things that struck me is Tunde is privileged. He in family, money, prep school, boyfriend who's a jock. I mean, it's they're both very privileged, but you see this in a light, and Ali, it was very deftly done. I thought there's a scene when they're both in the car when the police come up, and you see how privilege plays out and not. Just in their physical facial reactions, what you got out of Stephen in particular, the differences between Soren going, "I have rights, I'm filming this, you can't do this," and Tunde going, "You have to come," trying desperately, to be okay. Right. And having Soren have no idea. Soren just goes, as white people are going to do.
They shouldn't do this. And he's going, "They're going to kill me."
Right, not you, me.
They're going to kill me. Then you'll have to explain what happened.
Right. How do you get those performances out of them? I mean, that was a striking and extraordinary scene.
Well, I mean, for starters, those two actors are young men that are moving through the world, and Spencer Neville is, he's a really handsome young man, right? And so not only does he have the privilege of being young and white in America, he also has the privilege of being, really handsome, and that comes with certain things, and and he's aware. He's very, very aware as a man of what that is and what that space looks like. And to the extent that there certainly are experiences that he, as a person, has not had, he's always open to hear about them and engages, in spaces that he doesn't have the most comfort in a very, very real way. Steven Silver, on the other hand, is from Houston, Texas, and he's more than well acquainted with systemic racism and violence against Black bodies. And I don't know how many times he's been pulled over or stopped.
Right.
But it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to imagine what this is like. I know what this is like. Yeah, and so just allowing them to really inhabit that space, and when you have, when you talk about interracial relationships, that's not just a love relationship. Sometimes there can be friendships. So I have certainly been places with my white friends when I have, had a different experience than when I've gone to similar places, and sometimes the same place with my Black friends. Just the presence of that individual changes the dynamic. And we're well aware of that.
Right.
When we go out and we want to get stuff done, we send the white girl to ask.
Right.
What our own personal, carry on Karen. So one of those.
Which is a film you have kind of like a Karen in the making with Marley, a little bit.
Yeah, little bit. No, I mean, I would defend her character. Okay. Because Stanley will hop in as well, but I always took her as, I know girls like that, and I mean, I'm saying girls, but they're older women now, but literally they present in a way that's dynamic. They're alpha in the space of females, all of these privileges and things that people assume they have, but it can be lonely, it can be tragic. People grossly underestimate the sorts of difficulties you might have being that person. So, again, it's informing her and making her human. And Stanley told me about his idea of taking tropes and humanizing them. I don't know, Stanley, if you want to talk something about that.
Right. So essentially, I was 19 when I wrote this, so I had a very real understanding of my, artistic limitations when it simply came down to experience, right? So my approach to the work was, I'm going to break down archetypes and then rebuild them as human beings. So, within the piece, you have your emo, you have your jock, you have your cheerleader archetype. And, taking the inherent pieces of that, breaking them down, and then really poking at like what's truly underneath that. So like for me, like the criticism of Marley is inherently false, reason being, what Ali is saying is that like she actually utilizes her privilege to protect Tunde for a majority of the movie. she's one of the few people that is his friend openly, and like chooses to be around him. So I feel like when I'm very wary when rendering, characters of flesh and bone for people to diminish them and like reduce them into villain or antagonist. I think our love triangle or whatever is composed of like really complex human beings who are all dealing with things. People live life like my approach always is like, look, like everyone lives life like they are the lead character of their movie. Everyone is carrying stuff into the situation, and the difficulties that Marley is going through are valid. Her reaction to Tunde reveals something. I'm not gonna reveal the plot, but like when she has that reaction, right, that is a thing of like underlying racism and hurt, but it comes from a place of hurt. We have to understand like how these dynamics are working within the film. Just I just want to avoid being reductive as much as possible. You know what I mean?
No, and I know I'm a little hard on Marley, but she does find her truth,
Right.
Well,
and she does.
and I mean, it's
Yeah.
a difficult truth to face. And I think one of the things that we were able to do in terms of the loops is that we didn't use them to, create this elaborate puzzle. But what we used it to do is to reveal character in each different, individual based on what they were confronted with. So, even Tunde is grossly, mistaken about how he should approach something, to
Mhm.
being cruel, to Marley, and Soren does it, and Marley, does it. So I mean, that thing happens. All of these people at different points during this film are at turns, powerful, in the way that they can impact someone, but also
Mhm.
incredibly vulnerable in terms of
Mhm.
the way that they can be impacted,
Mhm.
depending on what the loop is. And that, I think, is the thing that lends to informing the humanity of it. Is that, like I said, you move one thing and then everyone's position in the dynamic shifts.
Right. And they are teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And they are teenagers. I mean, they are trying to make their way.
But it reverberates
Yeah.
through the adults as well.
Yeah. hmm It
And
does.
that I think is the great thing, that, I mean, there's some consistency when you're dealing with, adults who are, further along in their life, but they still have to make adjustments
hmm
based on what these other kids are doing. So I mean, that was really one of the fascinating things about the way Stanley, crafted the story.
One of the other scenes that I thought was really powerful and kind of played through the rest of the movie is the scene at the table when
Mhm.
Stanley's I mean when Tunde's father just gets like stay silent and comply. I mean, it is an emphatic moment. It is a stay silent and comply, meaning with the police when you get stopped. I mean, there is that fear, the rightly fear, the violence against Black bodies, but that stay silent and comply is also what Soren's asking him to do.
Mhm.
And Tunde's coming to the point where he is not, at least in that instance, in terms of queerness, not going to be silent and comply. It's just a really moving moment that he comes to
Mhm.
for his
I
own realization.
I mean, one has to understand, I think, that oftentimes any other, and I really do mean from an intersectional point of view, often has to make themselves smaller within white dominated space, quote unquote, spaces in which like the status quo is not them, right? So that's across the board. And I think, the father's like extension um works in like two ways, right? It's that like he has fear, and because of the generation that he grows up in, it like mends itself into like respectability politics really quick. You know what I'm saying? He's
Mhm.
like, you just if you just behave, which is like an inherent, like, which is anti-blackness that's like taught to people, so that, like, for protection, right? Respectability politics function from that space. In terms of his relationship with Soren, it's that, look, like, Soren has never not been privileged. He has all the privilege. In order to come out, he has to then decide to step outside of privilege. He becomes an other by being with Tunde. He becomes an other by being open. And, like, so when you're looking at it, Soren has a lot to lose. Tunde has very little to lose by making this action. He's already another in, like, every other category. So there's nothing, there's really nothing at stake for him. And I think that's, once again, like, I'm very wary of, like, reductiveness, when it comes down to this, because it is actually a very difficult thing for him, for Soren's character to do. However, white people, clinging on to privilege is still a racist act. It's still violent Black people. I mean, in fact, incredibly so. That's why that's a majority of the problems that the racial problems that America has, is white people clinging on to privilege and not wanting to make space or be an other, or be less than the position that they occupy within the status quo.
I saw that, and I'm not big on memes. They make for a great laugh, but every now and then one of them, like, actually has a succinct idea. And the one that I saw recently is, to privileged people, equality looks like oppression. And that's the space Soren is in, is that, again, to step out of this one space and into the space of other, is something that he doesn't want to be subjected to. It's something that he doesn't want to be subjected to, because he understands what happens to those people.
Right.
He knows.
Right.
And so,
Yes.
that's just the reality. When people suggest to themselves that they don't see or don't understand, or don't have a particular sort of privilege, when you ask them would they want to switch positions then with the people who they think are their equals, they always decline.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is a very tough decision for Soren. Like you said, he stands, or so he believes, to lose, that he could. And that belief is going to be prevailing, that he believes that whether he will or not in the end, we don't know. But it is, you do present that scene, like you said, with no judgment on Soren, no judgment really on Tunde. It's the choice that each one of them is going to make in that moment, whether he's going to come out to his father or he's not.
I'm sorry, Stanley, but in general, for me, I was very conscious about, wanting to, avoid the space of judgment, and that was already in the script. But it also extended to the actions of the officers in the story. The officers' actions are never examined, pro or con. What we just present is instances where things clearly get out of control quickly. And all we know is that it occurs.
Right.
The substantive examination of why it occurs is really immaterial, because we first have to determine that it occurs is a problem big enough to see ways to make it stop.
Right. We don't need to know why, we just need for it to stop.
Yeah, how many people get shot before you decide it's a bad idea for people that don't get shot to get shot?
Right. Yeah.
When does that
happen? Or that's your first reaction.
Yeah. So
there's not a lot of explanation needed to say just don't do that.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's not a lot of judgment in this film. Again, like I said, it's not it's not based in rhetoric or hyperbole or anything like that. It's really coming from, I feel like, as human a place as we could come from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you think of it as the finished product, it is hitting theaters. It's going to be on video on demand. For each of you, and Ali, I'll start with you. What is the moment of this film that you're most proud of?
I don't want to say because it would be a spoiler.
Okay.
However, it's a moment late in the film,
Mm.
and I think it is really tragic for one of the characters because of their lack of understanding. If
Mm.
they understood something about their own reality that is not apparent to them, then they could have a very, very different life.
Right.
Um, and and that's
Right.
really the moment that stood out to me. The violence, is what it is, but again, in terms of the relationship, that's really what I'm proudest of, the way that it plays out.
Right. And I'd say is our treatment of violence versus humanity, I think, throughout the film. That I'm trying not to spoil stuff, but the way that we render violence throughout the film um mirrors how and parallels the experience of like viewers consuming the violence against Black bodies, like internally. Like we had like really long conversations about what we want the experience of the audience in terms of violence to be, because it forces the audience to reckon with themselves and ask themselves, why did I feel that way in the middle of the film? And then
Mhm.
suddenly, and then point two is, there is a moment of big violence, let's say, overwhelming sort of thing, that is rendered, like afterwards, is rendered with the most, here's the thing about this, is that oftentimes films that deal with Black trauma don't showcase what it is to lose a person. Like, what that actually means in terms of families, in terms of friendships, in terms of generations. And I am very, very proud um, that we managed to render something that highlighted that really put an emphasis on life. As much death as occurs in the film, this really is a movie about life, and I think that's a really great achievement for us. Yeah.
And how beautiful that life can be
Right.
and is.
Yeah.
Right.
And people in all of their messiness and humanness, um, finding themselves as best they can,
Right.
Right.
and leaving a story. I mean, you start with the obituaries, but it's his story. It's the
And
story of.
that was a thing that I mean, when you talk about things to be proud of, that particular element was something that we crafted as we were, in pre-production. I was like, okay, this is called the obituary of Tunde Johnson, and that's a thing. And
Right. Yeah.
so, as I started talking to Stanley about that, and what could that mean, and what might that look like, and even how could we use that as a device, and what we discovered is that we were able to craft something that the deeper you go into the film, the more informative
Hmm.
this piece of the story becomes. And it really is about, by describing and relating and empathizing with this person in their passing, we were actually giving them life.
Right.
Mm.
Hmm.
So that was
A
just like,
full life.
yeah, that was like just like a beautiful tool that we were actually able to craft, and I'm really proud of that as well.
So, Ali, tell us a little bit about you know out on film. We promote queer film, queer stories. We independent filmmakers, because we know. I mean, part of our mission is to showcase our own stories of our community and all facets of our community, but also the filmmakers, and giving them a platform.
Yeah.
We know, but how difficult it is to get independent film made, to get queer film made, to get Black film made. Tell us about the journey of this film, and
Well,
just in terms of getting it to where you're getting it into theaters.
yeah, after after we premiered at TIFF, then the difficult business of selling a film and
Mhm.
going through all that kind of kicks in. And there were a lot of concerns about what sort of deal do we get to recoup over once 2020 hit, and we weren't that
Right,
far into it when the pandemic struck.
right.
So then suddenly, all systems were no longer go, all systems were stop. And then at some point during the course of a year, these conversations began about uplifting Black voices, and there's Black squares, and so we're sitting there going, oh, okay, we actually have all of that stuff inside this piece of work. It's all of the things that you say you're asking for right now. And what I believe and what I found was that there's a high level of disingenuousness around those ideas, which is to say, this was not an expensive film to make by Hollywood standards. What it costs to
Mhm.
make a film, they spend on Tom Cruise's sneakers to wear in his trailer when he's not on set in Mission Impossible 16.
Right.
Right? Like literally. It's like it's that. So, in the superstructure of entertainment, what this film cost to make was not a big deal. But the lack of action around powerful entities supporting it and promoting it in the face of what society was experiencing, to me, felt incredibly hypocritical, right? That notwithstanding, we persevered, and we keep looking for outlets, and we eventually found a partner in Wolf that supported it. And the beauty part for me is that the odd thing is that the longer it took for us to get it on the screen, the more relevant it was becoming by the day.
Mhm.
Mm.
I
Right.
also feel like if this had come out before the summer of 2020, people might not necessarily have been able to uh, see it in the same way, right? But now we can say, look, he wrote this story, 2 years before any of that stuff happened,
Right.
and as sort of a flashpoint, of creativity and reality, that happened last summer. And so now we have this piece of work. So the framing of it is different. How people, I think, are seeing it and receiving it now is different. I don't think it would have been bad by any stretch of the imagination before. The experiences and responses that we were getting from people were quite powerful. But I think now it's really been shored up by what we have all been going through.
Right.
And then Stanley, what is next for you? What is your next project? What are you working on?
So I wrote Tunde sophomore year. Um, I got something that I did junior year that's really fire. That's coming, like really fire. Very excited. Um, Hopefully I can continue to drop my college series and have my senior year project made as well. But yeah, I'm very excited for my 2021. There's a lot of good stuff coming. So yeah.
And Ali, what is next for you?
Actually, I'm partnering with Stanley on one project that
Junior year project, we're doing it. Baby, if you don't even know, we're 100% back. It's gonna be so fun. Oh my God. Yes.
this is odd. There's a symbiosis going on here that I don't know that I'm entirely comfortable with. But Stanley and I have actually become really, really close over the last couple of years, and personally as friends and even creatively, we just have connected around a lot of spaces. So I'm working with him on a couple of things, and I'm looking for another feature to direct. I have a couple of things in the pipeline that might be solid ideas, and I'm still in my television development and directing. So I'm staying busy, and staying open and waiting to get outside.
I know we're all waiting to get outside, and we're all waiting to get back in theaters.
Yeah.
Uh, So I want to thank you both, Stanley, Kalu, Ali, LeRoi. Thank you for joining us today at in Conversations with Out on Film. The film is The Obituary of Tunde Johnson. It is opening in theaters. This is an important film that I think everybody needs to see, and I certainly hope that you all go out and see and enjoy and really think about this film.
And wear a mask.
Thank you both, and wear a mask and stay distant. And behave yourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us.
All right.